Sorry, Julie, am I able to
Good evening. Welcome to the Costa Mesa Planning Commission meeting for Monday, November 8th, 2021. I call the meeting to order and ask Commissioner Rojas to lead us in the flag salute.
Please face the flag, right hand over your heart. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Rojas. Julie, roll call, please.
Chair Jericho?
Here.
Vice Chair Zick?
Here.
Commissioner Arith?
Present.
Please note that Commissioner Arith is present via Zoom. Commissioner Rojas?
Present.
Commissioner Russell?
Present.
Commissioner Toller?
Here.
Commissioner Vivar?
Here.
Excellent. Thank you very much. This brings us to announcements and presentations on our agenda this evening. We have none, so that will take us to public comment. This portion of the agenda is for members of the public to address the Planning Commission on matters that are within our jurisdiction but are not on tonight's agenda. So, Julie, do we have any public commenters for public comment?
No, we do not, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, anyone in the audience wish to speak during public comment at this time? Again, these are matters not on tonight's agenda. Okay, seeing none, I will close public comment. That will take us to Planning Commissioner comments, and we'll begin with Commissioner Arith. Do you have any comments tonight?
Thank you, Chair Jericho. I have no comments this evening.
Okay.
Thank you.
Commissioner Rojas.
Thank you, Chair. I have no comments other than to say that I did go and tour the facility today at Crevice. I wanted to make sure that that was disclosed as well. But outside of that, I have no other comments at this time.
Thank you, Commissioner Rojas. And we'll be asked for ex parte communications at the beginning of that public hearing, but I appreciate you sharing that. Commissioner Vivar.
I do not have any comments.
No, it's not. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
No. There we go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do not have any comments at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner Russell.
I just want to thank the Costa Mesa Alliance for Better Streets for sending over a copy of Confessions of a Recovering Engineer. I'm looking forward to the Strong Towns event on Friday, November 19th at the Normal Herzog Center. Housing and transportation are obviously linked, and I think that this gives us some ideas to how to frame the conversation of rezoning, and looking forward to how to make Costa Mesa a city that is more desirable and easier to live with. So thank you to them for sending that over. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Russell. Commissioner Toller?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have two comments, if you'll indulge me. I also have a little PowerPoint to assist me. The first one is in relationship to Smart Growth America. Smart Growth America, if you don't know, is a really cool organization that understands the relationship between land use planning, safe streets, the design of our public realm, urban design, and you can't really see on these screens, but they do operate under principles. They have 10 principles that kind of inform everything they do. And one of the tools in their toolbox that they're always pushing for is called form-based codes. If you go to the next slide, please. Form-based codes is something I've heard mentioned from this dais a couple of times in relation to the zoning changes that we're going to have to undertake in the wake of this new housing element. So from a real high level, real quick, form-based coding is kind of a different way of coding conventional zoning codes, like what we have here in Costa Mesa and what most cities have right now, are use-based. Residential goes over here, commercial goes over there, industrial goes over there. We use a lot of abstract metrics like floor area ratio, dwelling units per acre, things that don't really translate into something that we can imagine, right? Not really tangible design metrics. Form-based codes are more concerned with the shape and the feel and the character and scale of the places that we're trying to create. So as we think about how we're going to calibrate our zones to our vision for these places where we're going to get a lot of new development, form-based codes is something to think about now, because we're going to be making these changes over the next 36 months, and it's going to go by pretty quickly. So I bring this up because, next slide, please. The Smart Growth America organization, in the last month since we last met, they've created a report. It's called Zoned In. I encourage you to look that up, Zoned In by Smart Growth America. It's only about 50 pages. It's worth reading. It talks about the economic benefits and the shared prosperity that's been observed in places that are governed by form-based codes. They have 4 case studies, and they've had 10 years to measure these differences in places across the U.S. that are governed by form-based codes and conventional zones, and how they differ in performance. So I encourage you to look that up. It's a really cool document. It's just been released in the last couple of weeks, and it's kind of a big deal. Next slide. This is my next and final comment. So I'm going to piggyback off what Commissioner Russell was talking about. Strong Towns is another really good organization. If you're interested in urban design, land use, public financing, transportation, how all that intersects, Strong Towns is probably a organization that you go to a lot. You probably consume a lot of their content already. Their founder, Charles Marone, just released this book, Confessions of a Recovering Engineer. It was #1 on Amazon in the urban planning department for a while. It's kind of a big deal. It's a really good book. And I bring this up because, next slide, please. We got Chuck Marone to come to Costa Mesa. So he's promoting the book, and he's making a few stops on the West Coast. And one of those stops is going to be Costa Mesa. So I encourage you to save the date, Friday, November 19th. It's going to be at the Norma Herzog Community Center at 3 p.m., about 3 to 5. It's free. Just show up. You don't have to sign up or anything. Just show up. Bring friends. I promise you, I've heard them lots of times. It's going to be a fascinating discussion of these things. It's not going to be technical engineering stuff. It's stuff that we can all understand and relate to and take action on. So I encourage you to mark the calendar, make it a point to go. We got space for 300 people, and we want to fill the place. So that is it, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Toller. Vice Chair Zick.
Nothing tonight, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. I just want to acknowledge Commissioner Toller's remarks and why I'm so happy that he's on this commission. I'm a big proponent of form-based code. And apart from what the Zoned In and Strong Towns information he provided, just in terms of practical, real-world applications of form-based code, I would encourage any of my commission colleagues, or in fact any member of the public, to go to the website of the city of El Cerrito in East Bay, up in the Bay Area, that use form-based code on their specific plan for their major thoroughfare through that city. It is really a phenomenal exercise in form-based code, and it's proving to be enormously successful. So with that, that will close Commissioner comments. Brings us to consent calendar. We have no items on the consent calendar this evening, so we'll move on to public hearing. And Julia, I'll ask you to read public hearing item #1 into the record, please.
Chair, if I may interrupt for a moment.
Yes, Ms. Lee.
I'd just like to make a brief announcement. City staff did notice a conditional use permit for tonight's hearing at 1885 Anaheim for Lighthouse Church. That item is in fact not on tonight's agenda. We found that we needed to do a little more work on a couple of points. So we will be agendizing that item for a future Planning Commission meeting, and we will renotice at that time. I apologize for any inconvenience, and you will receive a notice in the mail if you received one last time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Lee, and I remember getting that heads up, and so I apologize for running right past you, but that's an important announcement. Thank you so much. Okay, Julie, public hearing item #1, please.
Public hearing item #1, planning application PA-21-01,
for a conditional use permit for an event center with on-site valet parking, and zoning application 21-40 for a minor conditional use permit to deviate from parking requirements based on unique operating characteristics of an event center located at 2995 Airway Avenue, Unit B, and an amendment to zoning application 17-31 to modify the hours of operation for a church on the same property occupying 2995 Airway Avenue, Unit A. Please note that one public comment has been received on this item. This is a call for any ex parte communications.
Okay, Commissioner Arith, do you have any ex parte communications to report?
Yes, sir. I've talked to their designee a couple times.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Rojas? I think you already mentioned it, but you can mention it again.
Yes, just going to repeat that I have visited the site today and had a communication asking questions regarding the development. It's unquestioned, but outside of that, that's the only communication I've had.
Okay, thank you, sir. Commissioner Vivar?
Yes, sir. I did a site visit last week on Friday and spoke to the assistant manager of the site. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner Toller?
Yes, I toured the facility last Tuesday and spoke with the applicant there.
Okay, Commissioner Russell?
I toured the facility last Tuesday and spoke to the applicant and representative.
All right, thank you, Vice Chair.
I met with the applicant and their team on site last week and had a brief conversation with the applicant outside chambers this evening to clarify a question I had.
Okay, and I also met with the applicant and the applicant's authorized agent on site last week to do a site tour. So with that, we will go to the public hearing and we'll turn that over to Ms. Walsh. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Commissioners. Caitlin Walsh, Associate Planner. The item before you is Planning Application 2101 for a conditional use permit for a 300-person capacity event center with valet parking at Crevice Classic Cars located at 2995 Airway Unit B. Zoning Application 21-40 for a minor conditional use permit to deviate from parking requirements based on unique operating characteristics of an event center, and an amendment to Zoning Application 1731 to modify the hours of operation for a church on the same property occupying Unit A. The subject property is located on the southwest corner of Calmus Drive and Airway Avenue and is improved with a 45,043 square foot multi-tenant building and 84 existing on-site parking spaces. The site has 2 points of ingress-egress off of Calmus Drive and 1 off of Airway Avenue. The site is zoned MP Industrial Park and has a general plan land use designation of Industrial Park. Surrounding properties are also zoned Industrial Park and are developed with miscellaneous industrial and light manufacturing uses. The building is currently occupied by St. James Church and an automotive sales and storage facility with motor vehicle repair services owned and operated by the property owner, Crevice Classic Cars. In the way of background, on June 22nd, 2015, a building permit and land use restriction was approved for the operation and use of St. James Church. The land use restriction specified that a minimum of 74 parking spaces be available for the church during their specified assembly hours on Sundays from 7:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. Subsequently, on August 24th, 2017, the zoning administrator approved zoning application 1731, which allowed additional church activities that were not previously recognized when the church was approved, including the use of the property for assembly during weekday evenings, Saturdays, and certain national holidays. The table on this slide shows the existing versus proposed hours of operation for the church. To ensure offset hours and provide the necessary parking required for the proposed event center use, the property owner is proposing to modify the hours of operation for St. James Church to be consistent with the original approval in 2015. The property owner has obtained a letter from the church authorizing this request, and as such, conditions of approval from Zoning Application 1731 have been modified as a part of this application to reserve 30 on-site parking spaces on weekdays from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. and 74 parking spaces on Sundays from 7:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. The applicant is proposing a 300-person capacity event center within a portion of an existing automotive storage warehouse owned and operated by Crevice Classic Cars. The proposed event space would be used for fundraisers, banquets, weddings, and similar events. An event center or banquet facility is not a use specifically defined in the city's zoning code land use matrix. However, pursuant to Section 1330D of the Municipal Code, the Director of Development Services has determined that the proposed event space requires a conditional use permit since it is not reasonably close to other uses listed in the land use matrix. The city has processed similar conditional use permits for event centers located in industrial zones, including the Harper, Fete the Venue, the Hood Kitchen, and the West Side Museum. The proposed event center, as seen in the diagram to the right, is approximately 7,903 square feet and consists of a reception, lounge, and seating areas totaling 7,383 square feet and an event support room totaling 520 square feet. The event support room will support back-of-house catering vendor operations since events will be catered by independent vendors with no food preparation facilities proposed on site. As proposed, the event space would be surrounded by a collection of classic and exotic vehicles that would be positioned around the event space based on the theme of the event. To ensure that the event area remains within the delineated blue area shown on the plans, all vehicles will be roped off from the event seating area and monitored by security staff so that guests cannot walk freely through the display areas. As proposed and conditioned, a minimum of 110 vehicles will remain within the vehicle display areas at all times during special events. Further, staff has included conditions to ensure that the multi-tenant building operates in a compatible manner with surrounding uses and that there are clear limits to the extent and capacity of events so that the events do not adversely affect parking. As seen in these examples, the event space would typically be arranged to include a stage for entertainment, a dance floor, buffet tables, a bar, and guest seating, surrounded by the exotic and classic cars. An event center, by definition of its use, will have activities which may include live entertainment or amplified music on site. The event center is within an industrial area and more than a quarter of a mile from any residentially zoned property and over a half mile from the city's bridge shelter. Therefore, staff does not anticipate a noise issue for the adjacent area. And in addition, the event center proposes to operate outside of the adjacent church's administrative and assembly hours and would not extend past 11 p.m. Further, conditions of approval prohibit outdoor activities and/or music speakers outdoors and requires facility doors to remain closed during events. Lastly, staff has contacted the police department and they have no concerns related to the proposed use as proposed and conditioned. With regard to parking, the site is legal non-conforming with 84 parking spaces, whereas code does require 115 spaces based on industrial parking ratio. The applicant is proposing to stripe the parking lot with an additional 7 standard spaces and provide a bike rack for a total of 92 spaces. One bike rack is credited towards the site. One parking space for the bike rack is credited for the site. The city uses a parking ratio of 12.33 spaces per 1,000 square feet for any portion of a building that is proposed to be used as an event space, including event support areas used for catering and staging. This ratio was based on a parking study conducted in 2019 for a previous proposed event center at 150 Paularino Avenue and has since been applied to subsequent applications for event centers. Applying this ratio, the required parking for the event center is 97 spaces. Consequently, a minor conditional use permit is required for the event center to deviate from shared parking requirements due to unusual operating characteristics, and specifically, the event center is proposing to operate outside of the church's administrative hours and specified assembly hours, when there would be a total of 92 parking spaces on site available for use. In addition, the normal operations associated with Crevice Classic Cars would not operate during special events. The 2019 parking study also determined that the average vehicle occupancy for comparable events is 2.5 passengers per vehicle. This analysis was based on empirical data taken from similar event observations. Based on this observed vehicle occupancy for event use, A maximum of 230 people are anticipated based on the site's available parking supply of 92 spaces. However, in order to accommodate proposed larger events with more than 230 persons, up to a maximum of 300, the applicant is proposing a valet parking plan. The valet parking plan proposes a total of 124 valet spaces, resulting in a surplus of 27 spaces above the code required parking when valet is provided, and a deficiency of 5 spaces when valet is not provided. When valet service is implemented, patrons would drop their car off at a valet stand near the front entrance of Unit B, and the cars would be parked according to the proposed valet parking plan shown on this slide. Staff does not have concerns with the proposed parking plan since the event center incorporates offset hours of operation from other uses on site. In addition, because the event center is a unique operation in that it attracts a large group of people at one time, it is anticipated that the majority of guests would either carpool or utilize ride-sharing services such as Uber or Lyft. Further, the owner has established an agreement with Airway Hotel to utilize their complimentary shuttle service to transport guests to and from the event center if guests are staying at the hotel. Lastly, staff has incorporated conditions of approval for the project to allow the event center to operate with a maximum of 230 persons without implementing valet and a maximum of 300 persons when valet is implemented. Therefore, in staff's opinion, the event use should not result in any parking impacts that are unusual for industrially zoned properties as proposed and conditioned. Furthermore, to ensure that the proposed use operates with minimal impacts to the adjacent properties, staff has included conditions of approval related to the event center operations, alcohol sales and service, live entertainment, valet parking, and fire and building code compliance. With that, staff recommends that the Planning Commission adopt a resolution to find that the project is categorically exempt from the provisions of the California Environmental Quality Act per CEQA Guidelines Section 15301 for existing facilities, and approve Planning Application 21-01, Zoning Application 21-40, and Zoning Application 17-31A1, subject to conditions of approval. That concludes my presentation this evening. I am available for questions. The applicant and the representative is also present, and they do have a short presentation this evening.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Walsh, very much for your presentation. Commissioners, any questions of staff? Commissioner Rojas, Toller, Commissioner Russell, Commissioner Villar, do you have any questions of staff? You got it. Wait, go ahead, punch it again. There you go.
One quick question. I might have missed this, but was the passenger loading zone, is there a clear spot where that would be for the Uber and other drop-offs for ride-hailing services?
As proposed, they do have a valet kiosk in front of the entrance of Unit B. So that's going to serve as their kind of drop-off location. And we have had the Transportation Division review the circulation plan so it does accommodate necessary drive aisles for appropriate circulation on site.
Awesome. Thank you.
Commissioner Arth, do you have any questions of staff?
No, sir. Thank you.
Vice Chair?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Ms. Walsh, for your presentation. So I'm looking at several components in the conditions of approval, handwritten page 6. And I want to make sure I understand the rationale behind them. And they primarily relate to, I believe, the maximum occupancy that we want to see limited at this facility. And so in condition of approval number 2, you state that there's a maximum of 300 persons. And then in condition of approval number 6, there's an indication that the vehicles must be roped off separately from the seating area. Could you explain the rationale for that provision?
Sure, I can attempt to answer that. So based on the applicant's proposed plans, they show approximately 110 vehicles within the display areas. on the project plans. And because it's going to be positioned around the event center, that is a way to ensure that the event is confined to a specific floor area within that facility.
Okay, so let me follow that up. So assume that they have an event where, for whatever reason, they only have 100 special guests that they've invited. Would we care if those 100 special guests roam in and around the vehicles?
Hello, Vice Chair Zick. Yes, I did question that condition earlier today as well as I was reading it. It seemed to make sense, but I do understand your concerns with that. It could easily be revised to not have a requirement there. It was mostly a belts and suspenders approach to trying to preserve that condition of the occupancy and the parking requirements, and just a way of really delineating the space. But the space is delineated in ropes, as you probably read anyways, so I think that was your point.
Okay, so the primary concern is the occupancy.
Correct.
Which leads me to the third component that seemed just a little bit unusual or cumbersome, which was the minimum of 110 vehicles. And so I understand that the idea behind that is if we pack enough vehicles in the building, that would basically prevent us from overpacking the building, exceeding the 300 occupants. And so the reason why I maybe have a question about that issue is when I do a very quick count of the number of vehicles shown on the diagram on staff report page 4, and I did my count a couple of times, so I could be off, but I come up to 108, which is shy of the 110 minimum. And when I look at that diagram, those cars are packed in, according to the diagram, in such a tight and I'll say efficient way that I'm wondering if when there's an event, would somebody actually go through and count up the vehicles and say, sorry, there's only 105, there's only 108, we got a problem, when the real issue that we're trying to manage is that there's no more than 300 people. Isn't just that one criteria sufficient to protect what interests we really have?
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay, thank you. No more questions.
Okay, I just have one question related to the valet parking plan, because Commissioner, I wanted to clarify. I imagined the 110 vehicle number was to make sure that the football field stayed within the parameters that would allow 300 people and no more. But I do have a question on the valet plan, which is handwritten page 32. So I'm not a valet, I'm not an operational expert when it comes to valet parking, so this may sound like a really stupid question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So about almost halfway down from the top of the page, we're looking at a bunch of red striped stalls, which are clearly where the cars will be parked in it. When you get about a third, a little more of a third of the way in, then they start tandem parking. And right about at the time you start that tandem parking format, there's some indication on the map that something's there, and I looked it up in aerial. It looks like some kind of loading dock from an aerial view. And it seems like the first two of those tandem stalls bleed into that. And my question is, one, is that I can't imagine that loading dock is above grade at any kind. If it is, I don't know how it's going to work. And then two, I just want to make sure transportation department is comfortable enough, because it doesn't look like there's a ton of maneuverability for that plan to back cars out to get to the car that's parked closest to the perimeter wall there. So I looked at this and I go, that's pretty tight, and God help the valet people who are moving those cars in and out, because it looks pretty tight to me. I could be wrong, but I want to understand what that structure is. If it's a loading dock, one, two, is it above grade at all? And what does transportation think about the amount of space to maneuver cars around in there. That's it.
Thanks, Chair. I can respond to that. So the hatching on handwritten page 32, it does indicate a differentiation in the paving, but it is the same grade as the parking lot, so it's not above grade.
Okay.
And on the second item, we did have the Transportation Division review the valet plans, so it does meet their minimum requirements. With that said, if you have any suggestions, they do exceed the number of valet parking spaces by 27 spaces when valet is implemented. So if we had to lose a couple of those spaces, they would still meet their code required parking.
Okay, and you explained it for me. I have no suggestions other than to the valet provider, be careful. But other than that, that answers my question. So are there any other questions of staff? Okay, seeing none, I will open the public hearing, ask the applicant to come forward. Ms. Newman, how are you? I will ask you while you're walking up to the podium if you've read the staff report and the conditions of approval and if you are in agreement with them. And let me turn the mic on for you. There you go.
Good evening. My name is Cora Newman. I am the principal with Government Solutions, Inc. I am the applicant's representative. And yes, Chairman DeArco, we have read the conditions and the staff report. It was very well done by Caitlin Walsh and your new member, Scott Drapkin. I do have one request to tweak on a condition, and I'll get to that in just a second.
Okay, fine. The floor is yours.
Oh, okay, thank you. Again, good evening, Chairman DeArco and members of the Costa Mesa Planning Commission. My name is Coralie Newman, and I am principal of Government Solutions, Inc. We are located at 901 Dove Street, Newport Beach, and we are the authorized agent, as Caitlin, Ms. Walsh has said, for Crevice Classic Cars. And I just want to say that after the almost 2 years of doing Zoom, this is just so fun to be here in person with all of you. And it's nice to meet many of you for the first time the last week in person. I want to thank, again, the city staff for all the hard work. They spent a tremendous amount of time on this application, which really showed in the staff report that was just presented to you. It was extremely thorough, and we really do appreciate it. With me this evening is Mr. Donnie Crevice. He is the owner of Crevice Classic Cars. And as a way of introduction, I thought it was important to point out that Mr. Crevice joined his father at the Crevice BMW in 1974 as a partner and stayed with the company till 2011. During that time, in 2006, he also ventured out on his own and became the founder of Crevice Classic Cars, which we're here discussing this evening. With him is Irene Genthner. She is the director of events for Crevice Classic Cars. And with us is Katie Newman, who along with Caitlin did a lot of the heavy lifting on this to get us here this evening, and she is a senior associate with Government Solutions, Inc. Finally, I would like to acknowledge the architect who is not here this evening, but did a lot of the hard work on both the interior and exterior improvements, Alter James. So I did discuss this. It's condition number 9 in the code requirement section on the conditions, and it has to do with the Transportation Division's impact fee. I have discussed this with both Ms. Walsh and with Jennifer Rosales, and she said that she would discuss this with her staff and that she agreed that we could, and I'll explain what the issue is, that we could during the next 2 weeks, we could have this fee looked at and reevaluated with her team. She thought that perhaps it was going to already be done by this evening. I don't know if that's occurred. No? Okay. But what happened is because of the changes, nothing's changed in terms of the occupancy of the building, as you pointed out, Commissioner Zick, but there was a change in the parking, which changed our transportation fee from $27,000, which we felt was a lot in the first place, to $44,650. And both Caitlin Walsh and Jennifer Rosales said that we will have an opportunity, even if hopefully we are approved this evening, we can work with staff to adjust that fee. I just wanted to highlight that for the commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Newman. Is that, oh, you're still going?
I'm done on the
Okay, very
conditions.
good. All right, very good.
Yes, and I think that the two questions that Commissioner Zick asked, we would be more than happy to remove that condition number 6 on the 110. We were agreeing with staff, but if the commission feels that that can be removed, we would be more than happy to do that. We felt it was a little onerous ourselves. And on your question, Commissioner DeArcle, the pavement, Caitlin had the answer correct. Thank you. What do we do? What does Crevice Classic Cars do? I just want to say this is such a fun and honor to be here this evening representing this really exciting project for Costa Mesa. It is a contemporary state-of-the-art storage facility, an active community of classic car enthusiasts, and a boutique consignment car seller. As those of you who visited the site, you know the site is existing and has the majority of the tenant improvements completed and approved by the city. What we are here tonight to do is to request the use of the facility for events, which, as Ms. Walsh has highlighted, requires a conditional use permit. As we've pointed out, as Steph has pointed out, the proposed event center is located in a very well-manicured, and we appreciated the support letter that we received that highlighted that this area is a very well-manicured and maintained industrial area sitting on the corner of Airway Avenue and Calmus Drive. The location sits between Red Hill Avenue and the John Wayne Airport, an excellent location for an event center. Currently, these are some artists' renditions of what is going on right now in terms of exterior improvements. These improvements have all been permitted by the city and they are underway, and this just kind of gives you a sense of what it will ultimately look like when we're inviting guests in. I know many of you that were there, you saw that it wasn't quite looking like this. And this is the second view of that rendition of the front improvements and view. I know many of you, when you came, you saw the 1969 blue Camaro that was in the place of this Porsche. But this is a single car will be displayed out here for visitors to both the event center and to the Classic Car Center itself during the day. This is the summary of what we're requesting. I think Caitlin hit this pretty hard, but again, it's a 300-person capacity maximum. We do close at 11 p.m. We are proposing to have charity fundraisers, weddings, and corporate parties. Amplified sound will always be located indoors, and that can include DJ'd music as well as live bands. There will be a minimum of 2 security staff present at all times, and as the staff report noted, there are already a number, 16 security cameras in the facility. That's one of the things staff requested, that we provide the security that's on site already, and we did do that in the security plan. I was also pleased to read that the police department is supporting this venue. We are not applying for an ABC license. This has been a commonly asked question. This is handled by the catering vendors. They bring their own ABC license, and it's my understanding that Crevice Event Center primarily uses one catering service. So it's very professionally, I've been very impressed. It's very professionally managed. So we do have we will ultimately have 91 on-site parking spaces, and for anything over 230 guests, we will be required valet. And one thing that we've noted is that guests are really starting to primarily use rideshare apps. So that's really affecting the reduction in overall parking requirements, which is good. And the event center encourages people to use Uber and other apps. And as was stated, there is an agreement between the Egress Hotel, which all of you know is over there on Bristol, and Crevice Classic Cars, so that if a person wants to book a wedding and have a set of rooms, then they get a complimentary shuttle service between the Egress Hotel and Crevice Event Center. And I think that's a really nice, positive relationship of doing business between two Costa Mesa businesses. I won't spend any time on this. Caitlin hit this, covered this very well. But again, the blue is the event center, the reception area, and the lounge. And the other areas, as you've noted, Commissioner Zick, are where the cars are very, very genuine, very delicately placed for the events. And by the way, we don't want, I think one of the questions was about the roping, and Donnie, Mr. Crevice whispered in my ear, the roping actually works for Crevice. They do not want the people wandering through the cars. They always keep the cars roped off during events. And the final slides here are just to give you a sense of what when the caterer comes, this is how the space is cleared so that an event can occur. We are looking here from the front reception area into the event space. This is from the lounge into the event space, and both of those areas were counted in our overall square footage for the event space. This is looking the other direction, looking back towards the lounge. You can see some of the exotic and classic cars. And again, another just view. So when a client comes and they are ready to set their party up, this is kind of what they're starting with. It gives you an idea. The cars are moved. If somebody wants to do more of a 1920s theme, that era of car can be displayed. So there's been surf parties that want more of the muscle car themes, so they're moved around to accommodate the user. And this is a kind of a panoramic view of the space, just to kind of give you a full view of what's available. This is a highly sought-after event venue. The event planner has been we've been dying to get here tonight because we have people that are queuing up wanting to do holiday events. So this hearing, thank you very much, was very important for us to have in November, the beginning of November. And this event place really came out of, it's kind of an organic growth, because it came out of people going and seeing the cars and saying, gee, I'd really like to have a party here. And that's how it evolved. Finally, in conclusion, here's just a couple of slides of what some of the caterers, event planners have come up with in using the space. Gives you a sense of the variety of things. This was the old space on Clinton, just to give you a sense of what can happen. I think Caitlin had this slide. And that concludes our presentation. Thank you, Chairman and members of the Commission. We are respectfully requesting that you approve this application this evening, and we look forward to any questions that you may have of us. But thank you so much for all of your time and effort, and thanks for coming out to the space itself. We really appreciated that. And welcome to the new commissioners.
Thank you, Ms. Newman. Commissioners, any questions of the applicant down to my right? Seeing that Commissioner Vivar, do you have questions? Commissioner Areth. Any questions?
Thank you, Chair. I have no questions at this time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Vice Chair, questions? Okay. I have no questions at the moment, so we will, thank you, Ms. Newman. We will open the public comment portion of the public hearing. I do want to acknowledge the electronic communication received from Mr. Joe Erickson of Isidore Myers Properties in Newport Beach. So we acknowledge that communication and received it. Any member in the audience wish to speak to this item, please come forward. Okay, seeing none. Julie, do we have anybody on telephone or Zoom who wishes to ask, make comments?
No, we do not, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. With that, I'll close public comment and ask the commissioners one last time for any questions. I'm sure there isn't because I just asked you 45 seconds ago. And I will close the public hearing and ask the commission if what their pleasure is, if there's a motion. Vice Chair Zick.
I have a question first.
Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, for staff. And I meant to ask it earlier about this occupancy limit of 300. Has the city fire department opined on the maximum occupancy that they deem safe in the building? And is 300 that number, or is 300 simply a limit based on parking availability?
The 300-person capacity was proposed by the applicant and was reviewed by the fire department. We will require an updated egress plan in plan check, but based on the conceptual plans, fire has no concerns.
Okay. In that case, Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a motion, if I may.
Yeah, I'm going to, based on your answer, I may have a question, but I'll come back to you if you don't mind, Vice Chair. So I was looking at the floor plan to spot all the exits. So what is the issue with the egress plan that needs to be revised?
So in the previous tenant improvement plans for the storage and warehouse facility, it had different occupancy calculations that applied to the warehouse, but now it's going to be an occupancy use. So it's really just bringing the codes into compliance with the revised occupancy calculations noted on the plans, and then ensuring that exiting is satisfactory for building code.
So so that is something that the fire marshal has to look at and approve. And until that happens, they can't operate. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, that's all I wanted to be aware of. Vice Chair, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to make a motion that we find the project is categorically exempt from the provisions of the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, per CEQA guidelines, section 15301, class 1, existing facilities, and approve the planning application 21-01, the zoning application 21-40, and the zoning application amendment 17-31-1A, subject to conditions of approval with a modification eliminating condition of approval number 6. And let me quickly explain my rationale for that. Clearly, our concern is limiting the maximum occupancy, and the basis for that concern is parking. And whether the cars are roped off or not, it sounds like that's something the applicant is interested in doing to control access to the vehicles, not an area that the city has an interest in. So whether the applicant is required to rope off the area or not seems to me to be something that should be up to them and not a condition of approval. And as I've mentioned earlier, this minimum 110 vehicles, again, if that's designed to limit occupancy, having a condition of approval that specifically states the maximum occupancy, to me, seems to be sufficient. We limit occupancy in other CUPs without having additional kind of language to try to box that all in. So to me, condition of approval number 6 is superfluous, and my motion eliminates that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. I'll second the motion, and I agree with you on the condition number 6 removal, given the condition of approval capping maximum attendance. And I do want to address, and then I'll ask commissioners for comments on the motion. I just do want to briefly address Ms. Newman's comment about condition number 9 under transportation. The note is that that the 44,650 is an estimated traffic impact fee that Transportation Division will calculate, I'm assuming based on our current impact fee. So I don't know that there's anything we need to do there, nor would I want to kind of establish that precedent of starting to monkey around with the traffic impact fees. I'll just, suffice it to say transportation and the applicant can work it out, and hopefully you will. With that, any comments on the motion? Commissioner Toller.
And Chair, if I may.
Yes.
Thank you. From staff's perspective, we'd like to just offer one comment on the removal of condition 6, and that is that the last two sentences have to do with something not related to the number of vehicles and roping off. So our suggestion would be to keep condition of approval number 6, but modify it to essentially say the operator shall ensure vehicle display areas and the general layout is maintained in conformance with the approved plans, and then keep the last sentence, but remove the language that I think is a concern this evening. That would be our suggestion.
So to clarify, I think what I understand what you're saying, Ms. Lee, is that the essentially the event area needs to conform to essentially the layout of the event area as presented in the staff report.
Correct.
Okay.
And the last sentence speaks to no display vehicles shall be located in the event attendee available parking areas, and we think that still applies. But we agree with that the roping off area or the number of vehicles is not necessarily important in that condition.
Okay. So, Vice Chair, what do you think of that?
Well, I like the suggestion. It begs a question. When we were discussing the plan check and the updating of egress information, is it conceivable that more exits will be required, or double door exits will be required, or modification to exiting hardware will be required? Is that conceivable that that will come out during plan check?
That was not my impression based on my conversation with the fire marshal, but again, we would want to evaluate this in plan check to confirm.
Because what I'm thinking is, whatever the, so I respect what Ms. Lee is recommending, and I'm thinking whatever the plan is that is approved in plan check, that configuration relative to the exiting in the event space is what ought to, the operator should be required to comply with, so that we make sure that no exits are blocked or impeded by some different arrangement of vehicles. So I'm not quite sure how to exactly wordsmith that, but Ms. Lee, I'm agreeing with you in wanting to make sure that the operator would be required to conduct their events in accordance with the city-approved occupancy plan or exiting plan.
I think my suggested wording used the term approved plans, and I think that covers all manner of plans, including a building plan check.
Okay, in that case, that's the way I would like my motion to read, is retaining the condition of approval 6 and rewording it to say that the operator shall conduct its events in accordance with the approved plan. Okay, thank you.
I'm good with that. Okay, Commissioner Toller, comments on the motion.
Yeah, I just had one. I wanted to confirm with staff that condition number 9 on handwritten page 10, the one we were talking about with the traffic impact fee, I agree with you, Chair. I just want to confirm with staff that this number, the passing of this resolution wouldn't in any way lock this number in, that it will still be able to be calibrated appropriately after this is passed.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. So I am in support of this motion, and I just want to thank staff for being flexible with parking requirements. I think it's very good that we as a city are not holding so fast to the letter of the law, especially when it comes to parking requirements. When businesses in the city want to generate good economic activity that everybody wants to do and is win-win. So I love it when these projects come forward. It demonstrates that staff is being flexible and reasonable and we're making things happen. That's it. Thank you.
Commissioner Rojas, any comments on the motion?
My only comment is the same. The second what Holder said here is that I appreciate the information presented by both the applicant and the staff here, and I am in support of this.
Okay, Commissioner Russell, do you have any?
Just that I support the motion from the perspective that I think we need as many event places in Costa Mesa as we can. It's a place for community to come together, and especially from the perspective of nonprofits having a good size venue. So I support this.
Okay, Commissioner Vivar, any comments? No, it's not. Not yet. You're a little high. Lower. There you go.
I just want to know what I'm voting on. So the only thing that we did is we modified the 6th section, right, of this. I'm in support of this. Yeah.
Yes. So yes, condition 6 is being slightly modified. It essentially locks the applicant into the 300 max, but it's to the approved plan, and it isn't contingent upon how many cars they have parked inside on the facility.
That makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense. I approve this.
Okay. Commissioner Arith, any comments on the motion?
No comments, sir. Thank you.
Okay. So I agree. I think this is, having visited it and wishing I made more money than I do now. I just think it's going to be a great event, and I think, that side of town, we have some event centers now that are there. I think this is an industry that's burgeoning. I think it brings people from outside Costa Mesa into Costa Mesa, introduces them not only to this great classic car museum, but our shopping district over in South Coast Metro, our restaurants, ultimately they come back. So I think, in a way, it's also a little bit of an ambassador that brings people from outside the city in and introduces them to Costa Mesa. So I'm very excited about it. And Vice Chair, I'll let you, what your comments on your motion?
I'm good.
Okay. Julie, roll call, please.
Okay, let's see, we have Chair Jericho,
Aye.
Vice Chair Zick,
Aye.
Commissioner Rojas, Commissioner Toller,
Aye.
Commissioner Russell,
Aye.
Commissioner Vivar,
Aye.
and Commissioner Arith.
Aye.
That motion carries 7-0.
Okay, thank you very much. That decision is final unless appealed to the City Council within 7 days. Mr. Crevice, good luck to you.
And Chair, if I may, before we move on to the next item,
Yes.
I'd just like to make a brief announcement. Some of you know this news, but our own Caitlin Walsh, this is her last meeting with us for the Planning Commission. You all have become accustomed to Caitlin's amazing staff reports and presentations. Caitlin started with us at the City of Costa Mesa as an intern and moved on to assistant planner and associate planner. She has some great personal news in that she's intending to get married next year, and they've decided to relocate out of state. And unfortunately, that means that we're losing Miss Walsh, but we're very happy for her and we wish her the best. So thank you.
Well, thank you for that announcement. I am heartbroken, but I am truly. You're terrific, Caitlin, and but congratulations on your impending marriage. I think that's terrific, and I wish you and your husband to be all the best wherever you land. But you'll be successful wherever you go. Trust me. You're very, very talented, and I'm going to miss you. Okay, thank you. Folks, if I can have you close the back door for us, please. Thank you. Okay, Julie, public hearing item number 2, please.
Public hearing item number 2. City of Costa Mesa 2021 to 2029 6-cycle housing element GP-21-01. Please note that no public comments have been received on this item.
Okay, before I hand this over to staff, I wanted to do a little bit of a process chat real quick with my fellow commissioners. So we're going to take this in kind of bites, as this is a very important planning process for us, probably the most important that the city has undertaken in a generation, probably. And so what I thought we would do tonight is we'll receive the introduction from staff of the draft housing element, and I also understand Nick Chen from Kimley Horn is also on the line with us, so that'll be part of the presentation. I would ask that you would take copious notes, flag categories or issues that strike you as being something you'd be interested in hearing more about at our subsequent meeting in November. And try to identify, tonight after staff's presentation, is try to identify to staff areas that you would like, that you plan on asking questions about at our next meeting. So I don't see this as being a meeting tonight where the commission's going to ask a lot of questions, hopefully not many. Just identifying the areas where you would like more discussion in our subsequent meeting. Spend the next 2 weeks after tonight really diving into the document and understanding it. And then when we come back at our November 22nd meeting, that's when we'll have Q&A with staff. We will receive public comment tonight, if there is any. We'll continue the public comment to the second meeting in November. If someone speaks tonight during public comment, they hear something and they want to speak again in November at the November 22nd meeting, the chair will allow it. And then after that, we should be getting our love letter from HCD about our draft housing element. It's due by December 6th, and we have a meeting December 13th. So if whatever modifications staff needs to make based on HCD's letter, they have 7 quick days to do that. And then it'll be before us, and at our December 13th meeting is when we will be making our recommendation to the City Council. So tonight, listen, take good notes, identify broad areas that you would like staff to be prepared for your questions when we come back on the 22nd. And then on the December 13th, we will take it up formally. So barring any questions, staff, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to begin the presentation this evening. Just to reiterate your direction, Chair Derrickle, the staff's intention this evening is really to provide an introduction to the 2021 to 2029 housing element update, and really to receive public comments, to receive feedback from this commission, and just a quick heads up on any topical areas that you'd like us to focus on for next meeting's presentation. Staff's recommendation this evening is to ask the Planning Commission to provide feedback and then to continue this item to the next meeting, November 22nd, 2021. And with that, we have Nick Chen with Kimley Horn, who is our housing element consultant expert, to provide the presentation this evening. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Chen, the floor is yours. Good to see you, sir.
Thank you, Chair Derrickle. Good evening, Chair Derrickle, members of the Planning Commission. It's great to see you all back in person. I wish I could be there. Fortunately, traveling on the East Coast a little bit for work. If it's all right with you, I'm actually going to turn my camera off just to not strain my not excellent hotel Wi-Fi. So hopefully it keeps the audio okay. I will bring the presentation up in just a second. Let me share and make sure that you can all see it. Please go ahead and give me just some indication if you can see the presentation. I see it.
Yes,
thumbs
sir.
up from
We've got
Commissioner.
it. Yep.
Thank you. So as Ms. Lee mentioned, we are giving an introduction to the housing element update. Chair Diaco, you mentioned that the document is currently in review by the State Department of Housing and Community Development, otherwise known and referred to as HCD. We expect comments, and we must receive comments back by December 6th. That is the end of the required 60-day review period that HCD has to review housing elements. And so we will receive our, as you said, love letter back by then and see what comments the state has for us regarding the document. We will go over a few things tonight, some of which has been discussed before. We'll also go over a few of the revisions made since we had our City Council and Planning Commission joint study session and some other recommendations that went into the document prior to it being submitted to HCD. We'll talk about some of the opportunity corridors that were identified in the housing element, the draft housing element. We'll talk about accessory dwelling units as well. We will review, again, some of the programs that were included in the housing element update, and also look at just some general feedback that jurisdictions, in our experience, have been receiving to give us an idea of some of the potential feedback we may get. Although, caution that every jurisdiction is different, every city is different, and their housing needs and document are different. So comments will obviously vary based on what HCD reviews in Costa Mesa's draft housing element update. So with that, I'll go a little bit into the strategy. This is actually a table directly from Appendix B, and it really is a summary, and probably the best summary within the document, short of the individual line items that I believe is Table B4 within Appendix B, which lists out individual candidate housing sites. But I wanted to go over this just briefly because it really does give a good snapshot of the city's strategy, and including why we do have a buffer in each of the income categories. So on the top line, and I apologize if it's a little small, and hopefully everybody is able to read it, we do have the city's 6th cycle 2021 to 2029 regional housing needs allocation, otherwise referred to as RHNA, 11,760. It is broken down by income categories based on percentages of the County of Orange's 2021 area median income. And those are very low, low, moderate, and above moderate income. Breaking down the strategy a little bit, there are a few areas identified, and we'll go over, we have a couple of maps in just a little bit to go over the different corridors that were identified. But the strategy really revolved around a few things. It revolved around looking at large sites that potentially could provide future housing within the community. We also looked at the overlay specific plans and urban plans that currently exist within the community, and looked at either potentially modifying the boundaries a little bit to incorporate some additional areas into those where it made sense, both from an existing development standpoint and from a proximity standpoint. And also looking at the development characteristics. I think in his opening remarks, Commissioner Toller mentioned some of the potential updates to take place. And that really is to a lot of the overlay specific plans and urban plan areas. I think there'll be plenty of discussion following the housing element process regarding that. We also looked at anticipated or projected accessory dwelling unit construction. And then, as we go through, we do, as I mentioned, have essentially what we call a buffer in each of the income categories to avoid what's known as known net loss. And so that is a state law that requires cities to maintain an inventory that meets their current need. So whatever the need is at that time, as reported by the city in their annual progress reports, the city needs to maintain an inventory of sites identified that can meet that remaining need. So if we were to just identify sites to barely meet the need, if a site were to develop not as anticipated in the housing element, or for something that wasn't for housing, as some of the sites are able to do, the city runs a risk of falling below and needing to identify additional sites. So this is to hopefully try and combat that and keep the city from going through this process more than you need to. So just to reiterate, some of the large sites, Fairview Developmental Center, there was a lot of discussion regarding potential housing. We heard from a lot of the community members, including housing advocates, on potential future ability to develop in that area. A few of the other areas, Sakyukalatu, Home Ranch, we did have discussions with property owners who expressed interest in developing housing, which is extremely helpful when trying to prove the viability of those sites to the State Department of Housing and Community Development. And then a potential senior center housing project in Pacific Arts Plaza. Again, none of these are actual projects. None of these are ones that are being proposed at the moment. This is simply to show that the city has capacity. And many of these do not show the full capacity. They're more accurate assumptions based on knowledge the city has of potential development or potential housing in the area, but they're not exact numbers. The housing element is not an exact process, unfortunately. So as we go through, it really is to show potential development capacity. The urban plans and specific plans and overlays that were identified in the housing element are the North Costa Mesa specific plan, Sobeka urban plan, Mesa West Bluff urban plan, 19 West urban plan, and the Harbor mixed use overlay. There are other areas identified, and we'll talk about a little bit later, to be studied as part of one of the housing, or two of the housing element programs, actually. They were identified by the City Council and Planning Commission. In terms of their potential viability, it was Newport Boulevard and 17th Street. They are not identified within the site strategy, but they are identified to be studied within the housing programs. And then lastly, the city anticipates the development of approximately 858 accessory dwelling units. This is based on past projection. It is aggressive, but the city thinks that it is a strategy that, a total or a projection that could very easily be met based on the growth in accessory dwelling unit production that we're seeing year over year. So we will wait to see what HCD says about that strategy. I mentioned the corridors the city has identified. You can see on the map, we've identified and circled a few of them. Mainly on the top of the map, you're seeing North Costa Mesa specific plan area. As you'll note, not every site has been identified within that area. There's obviously existing development, and the sites have been vetted on an individual level as required by HCD to see their potential development capacity. In many cases, we've identified areas where existing uses will remain and surface parking lots may be developed in a mixed use fashion. This has been in coordination again with property owners to try and get a realistic capacity, but these are not actual projects. This is just identifying potential capacity. You may also notice that there are some numbering in terms of the sites that go up and above the number of total sites that we have. For instance, you'll see site 207 here on the right side of the page. The reason for that is that we studied a number of sites as we went throughout this process. I believe we have just under 200 actual candidate housing sites within the housing element draft right now. But because members of the public, yourselves as commissioners or city council members may identify with a site throughout the process based on a number that was given during the process, we tend to not like to change the numbers. We will go back and renumber at the end to make it clear and make the document easily readable for adoption. But as we're going throughout the process, we like to maintain those numbers. So that's why those numbers differ a little bit. If anybody had that question regarding difference between the total number of sites and some of the numbering you see here. Also on this map, which is basically split the city in half, north and south, you see the kind of northern portion of Harbor Boulevard and some of the sites that were identified there. Again, a lot of community outreach went into looking at potential candidate housing sites to show which ones were, we believe based on community feedback, based on knowledge of existing uses and potential development capacity and potential for housing specifically could be identified. There's a cluster there on the right side that identifies the Sobeka area as well. You'll see in the legend, the densities are not all the same for different areas. North Costa Mesa specific plan area does have sites within that area do have a assumption of 90 dwelling units an acre, whereas it varies and drops as you go into Sobeka and even North Harbor area, based on trying to, again, develop in a manner that can coexist with existing development and complement existing development while sticking along these major corridor areas. As I go to the bottom half of the map, you will see site 38, Fairview Developmental Center. You see the bottom half of sites along Harbor Boulevard. There are some sites along 19th as well as some just in the general west side Costa Mesa area, as well as along the very southern portion of Newport Boulevard. So you'll see as you get to the lighter blue, there are lower densities as you go throughout these sites. Again, there are existing uses. We have noted those in the housing element. Table B4 in the appendix actually lists each individual site and the potential development capacity, as well as characteristics such as the zoning and general plan land use designation, property address, owner, assessor parcel number, and existing use information. And this is all required to be put into the housing element document. As we go through, I wanted to touch on a few of the comments that we got from Planning Commission and City Council study session that we held, I believe it's 2 months ago now. Probably the loudest one we heard the most was to include the Hive site or the charges facility within the housing sites list. That was added into the sites list. I should note it was not the entire property. It was the 4 acre, I believe, site, which is mainly the field right now. So existing uses outside of that to remain anticipated. I should stress it doesn't mean that it has to only be developed that way. We wanted to make a conservative estimate so we didn't overestimate and again get into a no net loss situation. We did hear from the community that the Metate Market on 19th Street was an important resource to the community. Those sites were removed from the document. We did make some assumptions, modifications to assumptions in the North Costa Mesa specific plan area. Not on sites, but we did, based on property owner discussions, change some of the area based on updated information. So we were able to actually get a little bit more capacity in that area. We did, as I mentioned earlier, had programs 3I and 3J, which address housing opportunities on Newport Boulevard and 17th Street. These initially were studied for potential candidate housing sites, but due to the city meeting their need on other sites outside of there, and the, I would say, potential to need to study those areas further, they were not included in the housing element. It does not mean that housing cannot later occur there if the city decides to take actions that would permit that. It just means that they are not housing candidate sites in the housing element. And then there were minor acreage and density cleanup items that were addressed as well before the document was submitted to the state. Wanted to touch on our ADU strategy a little bit and reiterate, I think I addressed this a little bit earlier, but accessory dwelling units or ADUs are units that, as many know, are being promoted by the state really as a way to get additional housing units throughout the community. State requirements pretty much allow ADUs to be developed in a lot of areas. So they are a viable strategy, and because they oftentimes are smaller, they can potentially be more affordable. The state has actually surveyed many cities and jurisdictions within the Southern California Association of Governments, or SCAG region, and identified assumptions on affordability categories that we can use in this housing element. So we've applied those to the city's assumption of accessory dwelling units. And again, we have based it on about the first 6 months of the year. There were around 53 applications for ADUs. That is not permitted, so that's just applications, but it is an indicator that the city is really picking up, residents in the city are picking up interest in accessory dwelling units. And we anticipate over 100 per year to meet what we have anticipated in the housing element. So from here, I'll go into housing programs. Again, this is an overview of the programs within the housing element, draft housing element document. And what the housing element programs are, to kind of go over again, I think what we discussed at the last meeting, these are really the actions the city commits to taking. So as with every good plan, you want to have some actions that come out of it. The city has identified in section 4 of the housing element document a list of programs, as it is required by the state, of actions that will be taken throughout the planning period. So you'll see we'll go through a sample of one of the programs, and you'll see the different components that are required to be part of it. But these are actions the city has to complete, and not only has to complete, but has to track progress on through the annual progress report, or the APR, that's submitted to the state each year. So the city will look at, again, the timelines identified for those different actions. They don't necessarily have to complete each action, but they do need to go through and by the required time frame, have made progress or completed these individual actions. The housing programs were developed as a response to a number of different items. One was data trends in the community profile. You'll see as you read through the document, especially the community profile, which is section 2 of the draft housing element, that oftentimes we refer after we, for example, I'll say senior housing, after we discuss the city's characteristics regarding senior housing and some of the needs. If we've identified it for a program, we will identify that program in the section to tie the two sections together. So to tie the data to an action program that came out of that. We've also related some to what we heard during community engagement. We got a lot of community feedback and went through a very long community engagement process and really received a lot of really great feedback. So some of that did result directly in programs in the housing element. We've also looked at the constraints and fair housing findings, which you can find in section 3 of the document. This is really identifying mainly governmental constraints. The document does look at non-governmental constraints as well, which are the cost of land. They're things that the city doesn't have the power to affect. But mainly when you talk about actions the cities can take, the focus is on governmental constraints, such as development processes and different things that may play a role in the development of housing in the future, specifically in the next 8 years, as well as fair housing, which is a big point of emphasis for the state. There is a lot of analysis relating to displacement, relating to the potential for that. And it's all outlined in that section and did result in a program where the city looks to take actions to mitigate what are called contributing factors. So there's also new changes and requirements within state law. We'll go over a couple of these in the next couple of slides. So to run through these, I think we ran through these really quickly. We can go through them a little bit more detail tonight. But these are not all of the programs within the housing element. I believe these are the ones we chose to emphasize because they do have either ties to the data that we presented or they're important processes for the city. So it's not to say that not all the programs are important. Some of them are more maintenance related than they are actionable changes for the city. So program 2A, the city is looking to implement an inclusionary housing ordinance. They're currently studying what the details of that should be, but it is one of the key programs the state looks for in terms of how you really get affordable housing built within a community. Outside of density bonus, there aren't really a lot of ways that drive inclusionary housing ordinance other than that and agreements with affordable housing developers who get very competitive funding to do fully affordable projects, many of which have been done in Orange County, but their inclusionary housing ordinance is a great way to get potentially affordable housing in a community. I mentioned earlier, the analysis showed that approximately 11% of Costa Mesa population was 65 years or older. 7.5% are seniors living alone. So the need for senior housing options is an important study. The programs that we have commit the city to explore senior housing options, just like in program 2E, where it commits the city to explore large family household options and trying to essentially find ways to incorporate that in the community. That may be through discussions with developers who specialize in those. It may be when people come in looking to express interest in developing housing, but not sure what they want to do. It may be guiding them in a direction that hopefully can meet some of the city's needs. These are not hard, fast rules. There's no language in the program that says you must develop 200 units of senior housing or anything like that. That's not the way that these programs are written. They're written in a way that can be actionable and ways that the city can actually achieve the goal without tying it to specific metrics like the housing element does for candidate housing sites. Program 3F looks at motel conversions, efficiency units, co-living housing types. And it's really because the city doesn't currently have a definition within the zoning code that addresses these. So in order to be able to make these housing types feasible, we want to look at some of these potential options. There are also legislation funding options that have come out relating to specifically motel conversions with Project Home Key that could provide additional resources for these types of developments. So as we go through Program 3B, the sites analysis, essentially these next couple are related to the sites. The city is required to make some changes to the zoning code regarding development on some of these sites. So we talked earlier about Fairview Developmental Center. The analysis will basically look at potential future housing and the way in which that gets permitted. North Costa Mesa specific plan would be to identify essentially the housing sites that have been identified within that corridor and ways to permit that potential housing. North Costa Mesa specific plan, as I think you may know, does currently permit housing as a use in some areas. So it would just be the necessary modifications to bring that consistent with the assumptions in the housing element. The urban plans and overlays, as we discussed earlier, have not, I believe, been updated in quite some time, perhaps since their inception. And we heard a lot during the community outreach process that those plans could use a refresh, and it happened to fit very well with the city's strategy regarding future housing. So those plans will be, again, addressed as one of the action items in this housing element. And those will be looked at by staff and yourselves and city council, members of the community. We'll all take a look at potential housing options in those areas as identified in the housing element. And then lastly, the city has to include a program that identifies the number of accessory dwelling units that are being anticipated for the element, and also needs to identify actions the city may take to try and promote that and basically get to that high goal of 850 or so. The programs also do include language regarding Measure Y. This has been something that was identified early as a potential constraint. In relation to the city obtaining a compliant housing element, the city continues to work to identify what exactly needs to be researched and discussed with regards to Measure Y and the housing element. We did include sort of a general program relating to new federal and state funding sources. Housing is obviously a huge topic in California, but it's a huge topic nationwide as well. And funding sources are becoming available. These may not necessarily be funding sources for the city. They may be funding sources that become available that the city is able to discuss with either interested property owners or developers who may be looking, which could benefit the city in having somebody come and invest and be able to build affordable housing within the community with the assistance of some of these programs. It doesn't identify specific programs because oftentimes, especially lately, it seems, new programs are popping up every day, new funding sources are popping up. So it really is just an analysis and a research action to continually do throughout the planning period. And lastly, I mentioned that there are a number of, well, there's really one program, but there are a number of actions relating to fair housing. This is based on contributing factors to fair housing that are identified in Section 3. There is a large analysis regarding potential displacement, even down to transit, air quality, and things like that get assessed in terms of future housing or potential housing and how that relates to fair housing issues within the community. And really the requirement that the city analyze affirmatively fair housing in general. So with that, a sample housing element program, as you read the document and as you read through Section 4, you'll see each of the programs is laid out this way. There is a program number, in this case 3K. There's a kind of summary title. This is annual progress reports. And then there's language that basically commits the city to an action. So each of these programs has a very direct action. In this case, the city, Costa Mesa, will complete the required housing status reporting through the city's annual progress report. So it very clearly states what the city has to do. It does provide background information in a lot of instances. Some of the programs are a little bit more direct and a little bit more basically straight to the point of what needs to get done. Some there is a benefit to having some background information to it. But this very quickly outlines what the city needs to do, continue this process of what they're currently doing, and report development activity as well as progress on these programs and making, essentially achieving the outcomes that are identified in the housing element. The city is required to do that each year. Each program will have a time frame. So in this case, many of the programs you'll see say annually. Because this is an 8-year process, You can sort of think of this as ongoing or annually. The city is required to continue to do this throughout the planning period and essentially assess how successful they are in doing that. You'll see a responsible agency. A lot of times that is identified as the City of Costa Mesa's Economic and Development Services Department Planning Division. In other cases, there are outside agencies that would be responsible for that. If there is, say, a county agency that distributes Section 8 housing vouchers or something like that, there could be a different responsible agency. But in many cases, it is the city's responsibility to complete these programs. And then funding source is the last required element of it. This is in kind because it's essentially a staff requirement. But there are other funding sources identified that we are aware of and we're able to include in that. So as you go through the document, you'll see different funding sources. I know many of you are very up to date on a lot of housing related topics. You've followed and participated in this process very closely. So, we'd certainly love to hear comments if you know of additional funding sources or things like that that could be included within this document as well. Certainly don't limit your comments to just the big picture things we'd like to hear about potential funding sources that we may have not seen or maybe new. So next steps, we wanted to talk a little bit about the environmental compliance. The city did prepare a draft initial study, mitigated negative declaration for the housing element update. This was done at a programmatic level, which different from many of probably the environmental documents that come through Planning Commission, which are for specific projects and can analyze specific projects. This analyzes potential impact at a program level. So it doesn't have, while it does have a program that outlines a certain number of units and again, corridor areas that have been identified, it doesn't have specific projects. It doesn't have specific number of units, heights, anything like that for developments because there is no development being proposed. So these documents have to be prepared at a programmatic level. I will be bringing next time we have our meeting later this month, our CEQA expert who can answer additional questions relating to the environmental process. And then future changes and amendments to overlays and specific plans to accommodate the RENA allocation are analyzed in future environmental documents. So that is to say, there are many different types of potential development that can occur after this as part of the housing element, and they may be subject to different processes regardless of being included in this housing element compliance document. So lastly, I wanted to just discuss for a little bit some of the feedback that we're seeing in other jurisdictions. I mentioned this in the very beginning of the presentation, and this is not to say that the city of Costa Mesa will receive any of these comments, but I will say it is likely. The state seems to be very consistent in all of their comments, regardless of what is getting submitted. We believe that we've addressed each of these comments within the document, but it is within the state's right to basically ask for additional justification or analysis if they feel it's warranted or if they were not able to properly discern some of the information that we provided. So with that, again, I don't want to say that we essentially are going to get these comments. We will have to wait until the 6th to see what comments the city does get. But the state has been, again, emphasizing fair housing, including additional analysis. They actually just last month released some information regarding initial displacement analysis they would like to see performed. So we will certainly, if that becomes a comment, include that in a revised draft that will come back to you. Information on non-vacant sites. We did a very thorough analysis, including, again, a lot of engagement with property owners to look at non-vacant sites. So this is essentially infill, which makes up the majority of the city's candidate housing sites. HCD presumes that vacant sites are essentially available for development. They want cities to look a little bit harder at sites that are not vacant. So we believe, again, that we've included enough analysis to justify the sites that were identified. But if we are asked to basically provide more information, we'll look at different ways to do that and discuss that with you as well. Additional actions to promote ADUs. Again, the city is actually included within their housing element a number of different actions relating to accessory dwelling units, which should suffice. The state does have a pretty strict look and interpretation of their strategy for how many ADUs that you count. And we are, with every other jurisdiction, slightly more aggressive than that because we believe the more aggressive approach is more appropriate and we believe it's more accurate. for the next 8 years. So sometimes there's additional requirements to study that. And then lastly, I mentioned there's changes to state law, every year. There are some small zoning code cleanup changes that often get asked. So if any of those do come across, we'll obviously, you'll see the letter just like we will, and we'll discuss those if you would like as well. We can't really anticipate what those may be, as every city's code is different. So last slide, I promise. Thank you so much for sticking with me. The schedule to complete the housing element update. So we submitted our draft October 5th. We will receive our comments by December 6th. We would have tried to receive it a little earlier, but it's the weekend, so December 6th is the first time that we can receive that for the 60-day HCD review period. We will revise the draft and resubmit to HCD, and then essentially have a second review period and have public hearings in December and January. And I want to explain that a little bit. Essentially, we will bring the comments to you as a planning commission. You'll be able to review the comments. You'll be able to review the draft. Essentially, those bubbles should probably either be switched or put on top of each other, but you'll be able to review the draft, review the responses and the revisions that city staff and us as a part of the team made to the document, with the goal of resubmitting to HG to try and get any additional feedback they may have. Hopefully we hit it the nail on the head right after the first review letter. That's always our goal. And by resubmitting to HCD, we can try and get those comments and hopefully a letter of substantial compliance back as early as possible, so that as you are going through hearings, we may be able to have that for City Council. So that's the goal in terms of going through the rest of the process. There is some play here and there, but as you mentioned, it's a very quick turnaround. It's about a week for us to turn around any comments that the state has. Luckily, we will hopefully have a call with them about 45 days into the review period. They've been a little bit hit or miss on having that review call. It's not required. It's a courtesy that HCD offers, but that will give us some indication of some of the comments they may have and allow us to start making revisions a little bit earlier. So hopefully they can help us with that in terms of meeting the time frame. And when we resubmit, it is another 60 days, but HCD has also been, in some cases, offering expedited review if there aren't that many comments. So that, again, would be our hope. And with that, that's the end of my presentation. I appreciate you all listening. I'll stop sharing my screen and pass it back to you, Ms. Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chen. And Chair, that concludes staff's presentation. Again, our requested action from the Commission this evening is just to provide feedback on topical areas that we may be able to sort of provide you a little deep dive into as part of our staff report and presentation at the next meeting, and then ultimately to continue this item to your next meeting, November 22nd, 2021.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Lee, and thank you, Mr. Chen, for your thorough presentation as always. A quick housekeeping question I have of the city attorney, Mr. Preziosi, and I'm a little bit unclear about, is this a public hearing or is just an information item? That'll help me out in moving forward. Okay, so Ms. Lee, did your microphone came on?
Yes, I just wanted to clarify. We did notice it as a public hearing to just so we could open it to public comment, for example. But the idea is for it to be informational presentation to the commission. Okay. So we covered both bases.
So I do want to open a public hearing then, because what I'd like to do is go direct to public comment, and then we'll have commissioners weigh in. So do I need to open a public hearing and then we're just going to continue that till the 22nd?
That would be our recommendation, is to open the public hearing and then continue the item.
Very good. So I will open the public hearing on this item and also open public comment. I will ask anybody in the chambers if they wish to speak to this item, please come forward. Okay, seeing no one, we'll go to Ms. Colgan and see if there's any public comments on Zoom or by telephone.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, please proceed.
Rich Gomez, you may provide your public comment.
Yes, good evening.
Yes, sir.
Yes, okay, thank you. Yes, good evening, Chair and Commissioners. My name is Rich Gomez, and I'm with the Southwest Regional Council of Carpenters. I am speaking tonight on behalf of our members and their family members who reside in the city of Costa Mesa and the surrounding communities, who live, work, and recreate in the vicinity of these projects. We believe that our members will be impacted by the environmental impacts of these projects. The city should require that the projects to be built by these owners and developers to utilize a local and skilled and trained workforce and not allow contractors from out of state to build these projects, or contractors who are bad actors and exploit their workforce and do not provide a livable wage and benefits. The city should, the local hire and skilled and trained workforce requirements reduce construction-related environmental impacts while benefiting the local economy. Moreover, just this year, the South Coast Air Quality Management District found that the use of a local state certified apprenticeship program or a skilled and trained workforce with a local hire component can result in air pollutant reductions. In a recent 2020 report titled Putting California on the High Road, a Jobs and Climate Action Plan for 2030, the California Workforce Development Board concluded that investments in growing, diversifying, and upskilling California's workforce can positively affect returns on climate mitigation efforts. And lastly, local skilled and trained workforce requirements can boost economic development and mitigate transportation and greenhouse gas impacts by minimizing vehicle and miles traveled, keeping our workers close, and eliminating these long drives, to and from work, keeping them in their community, working in their community, keeping their money in the community, providing community wealth. Chair and Commissioners, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak tonight. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next speaker.
Kathy Esfahani, you may provide your public comment.
Thank you. I would like to just reiterate 2 points that our Costa Mesa Affordable Housing Commission coalition has raised earlier with the city. One is, obviously the inclusionary ordinance, adopting an inclusionary ordinance is going to be key to Costa Mesa actually getting affordable housing for lower income households built. We urge the city to prioritize the adoption of that inclusionary ordinance within a year of approval of the housing element. It would be just a tragic mistake to do any rezoning, changing any specific plans or anything to give entitlement rights to developers and owners without first having an inclusionary or an effective inclusionary ordinance in place. And secondly, obviously Measure Y is a huge impediment to the construction of affordable housing and all sorts of housing. And we urge the city to include as a program that any housing development, which includes a minimum of 20% of the units as affordable to lower income households, should be exempt from Measure Y. And I think the justification for this is Measure Y itself has language which says that Measure Y does not apply to any housing required by law, affordable housing required by state law. And, obviously it's vague language, but I think it's very reasonable to argue that the RENA requirement is a legal requirement, and we're not going to build the housing that's required for lower income folks without, without being able to proceed unhampered by a Measure Y citywide vote. So those are my 2 recommendations for this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Linda, you may provide your public comment.
Good evening, Planning Commissioners. My name is Linda, and I want to thank you for providing an opportunity to provide comments. Considering the city submitted the draft to HCD, and we're waiting for them to provide their love letter. I really wasn't expecting any more discussions on the draft, but I wanted to thank staff for taking advantage of this time and not wasting any opportunity and holding additional discussions and taking additional comments from the public. I very much appreciate your time and effort on ensuring that this draft will be reflective in how we can shape the housing needs for all income levels for the next decade. I also want to echo Kathy's comments on inclusionary and to exempt affordable housing for Measure Y. I also have 2 additional comments. As the city moves forward in updating the draft element, can staff please provide a redline version of upcoming revised drafts? There was an initial draft prior to what was submitted to HCD, and I requested for a redline version, but it was confirmed that there wasn't one. And moving forward, it would just be so helpful to have redline versions to allow the public to easily identify track changes. Because it's just so difficult and time consuming to look at an older version on one side of my computer screen and a newer version of the draft on the other side of my screen, while trying to figure out if there's any changes in this 200+ page document. Secondly, it would be really helpful to provide the public an Excel version of the site inventory so that we can filter the information on what we want to analyze on our end. I also requested for this in the first draft, but there wasn't one. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay, thank you very much. Any additional speakers?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. We will keep the public comment open for our November 22nd meeting. And so I'll bring it up to the dais and ask the commissioners if they want to, again, share with staff areas where they would like a little bit of a deeper dive that they will be questioning. They'll want to ask questions about at our November 22nd meeting. So I'll start with Commissioner Arith.
Thank you, Chair DeArico. I appreciate it. I'd like to start by saying I think so far staff and Kimberly Horn have done a great job on this draft. Between the initial study and the mitigated negative declaration and the draft housing element, I have about 50 or 60 comments or observations. But I think in the spirit of what we're going for tonight, I'm probably just going to forward those comments and observations and potential corrections to staff on the side. But I think as to go to what a couple of the speakers talked about, or one in particular, it would be helpful before the November 22nd meeting if we had a red line version of the changes so that we can actually observe track changes along the way. That would be extremely helpful, especially as you address our comments on the commission and in the public as well. In the spirit of time for this evening, I think there's only a couple areas I want to focus on. And I'll draw your attention to the draft housing element, chapter 2-34, and then put that in relationship to chapter 3-92. Where at the bottom for a special focus on the moderate income households, it says, the maximum affordable home price for a moderate income household is $377,000 for one person household and $558,600 for a 5-person family. And with special emphasis that I put here, moderate income households in Costa Mesa would not be able to purchase a home in the city, which I found extremely surprising. And I kind of carried that thought with me all the way into the next chapter, into 3-92, where at the bottom of the row, when we're talking about the summary of the RENA status and sites inventory, you're talking about the sites inventory total for each income category, where, say, for example, the very low income category is 111% of expected, low income is 107%, moderate income 161%, and for the above moderate income 181%. I think this concern of mine as it comes to the, it could be best described as the missing middle, and in the spirit of, actual ownership versus rentership in this city, it would in fact be nice to see some kind of emphasis to help people find housing stock for purchase at a lower price point so that they can actually create equity and invest into the community in perhaps in a different way. So I think if anything, I would like to see perhaps a little bit more emphasis on the home ownership side of this document, if at all possible, especially for the moderate income category as well. Let me see what else I could observe here. I think some of the figures along the way are using some data from the ACS 5-year estimates that's a little bit dated. Some of it's from 2018, and I'm hoping that we have some just more current data. I know it's a 5-year estimate, so it makes sense given where we are in the decennial census. But if there are any other data sets we could use to kind of fine tune things, 2018 seems like a lifetime ago. And then I think I'd have to read a little bit more on this, but I think additional information on Measure Y and what exactly gets triggered and when, and that would also be helpful as well. Other than that, I think you all did a very fine job, and I look forward to submitting my comments here soon. Thank you very much, Chair.
So, Commissioner, thank you very much for your abbreviated presentation. And you're right, I would encourage you to submit your comments and observations and questions to staff as soon as possible so they have the ability to work with that prior to the 22nd. And we'll go down to Commissioner Rojas.
I too as well have some questions I've been making notes on, but I will reach out to staff directly with my questions as I develop them from there. Until then, I have no other comments.
Okay, Commissioner Vivar. You got it, now it's on.
Thanks again for the presentation. I think it was very thorough. I'd like to sort of echo what Commissioner Arith mentioned at the beginning. I would like to hear more information on assistance to people who would like to buy homes, especially first-time home ownership. I think is a great opportunity for many people who could have the means to own a home if they had a little extra help. So I think I'd like to hear more about what assistance we can provide to moderate income families and even lower income families to achieve this. I'm not sure if this information is a little dated, but I think the sort of median single-family home price in Costa Mesa is higher than what was presented. I don't know if that presentation took or the calculations of that took into account the sort of rise that I think occurred in the last 2 or so years. And regarding the displacement, I would like to sort of ask questions further on, or maybe speak with staff about this on my own, but about what displacement is expected to happen with the current proposal, and also what displacement could happen from any currently occupied parcels or lots that the state might want to encourage us to look at. So any displacement of people, but also of any small businesses that occupy any areas that might be lost with the sort of planned proposal. So that's kind of what I'm wondering about. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Vivar. Commissioner Toller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Obviously, it's clear we don't want to go too deep into the weeds tonight. And I know we don't want to derail the train either. We're on a tight schedule. But I'm gonna just mention the things that popped out to me and hope maybe we can.
Please.
Yeah. So this is a really good, despite how daunting this was when this showed up on my door, it was very well written. It's in plain English, it's intuitive and clear. It was a surprisingly easy read. I really appreciated how the impediments are divided between governmental and non-governmental. The non-governmental impediments to the production of housing, one of them was available financing, and that section I think was missing a little bit of discussion because it focused exclusively on available financing to the purchase of homes, and it did not address the available financing for the production of homes, which is the point of the exercise, in my opinion. And conventional federally backed financing strongly favors the production of single-family homes and big projects. That's why we see single-family homes, and albeit more and more crammed onto smaller lots awkwardly, right? But they're still single-family homes, and then big projects, Baker Block, One Metro West, Blue Soul, and the in-between stuff, the stuff that makes up those neighborhoods that we love and visit, the small multiplexes, the small neighborhood-scale mixed-use buildings, those fall between the cracks of available financing right now. So I think it would be helpful to daylight that in this housing element and have a section discussing that. Moving to governmental constraints, that's kind of the elephant in the room across California. That's the reason this whole drama between cities and the state is unfolding, right? It's governmental constraints, it's our zoning. I'm not going to nitpick every little bit. There's a lot in there that we could identify as potential hindrances to the production of housing, but two big ones that I would want to just briefly mention that I hope we could have a little bit more robust discussion on the next time we meet, and maybe in the next draft. DUA, dwelling units per acre. We know that's a metric at the general plan level. That's a metric that's useful for environmental and transportation consultants because they need numbers that are clean and simple to plug into their models. But when we apply that parcel by parcel through zoning, I believe that's a major impediment to the production of housing. R3 is even capped at 20 dwelling units per acre. You could have a duplex, a triplex, a fourplex, a sixplex on a 10,000 square foot lot, and you blow it out of the park. You can't build those things because we apply DUA through zoning on a parcel by parcel basis. And I think that's a major impediment that needs to be identified. The second one, parking minimums. We have a line in here that, if you're following along, 315 at the bottom of the section. To conclude, the parking requirements of the city of Costa Mesa do not pose a constraint to the development of housing, as parking is flexible and based on the number of bedrooms proposed and the housing type comparable to neighboring cities. But if you look at the table above, table 3.7, even a studio requires 2 on-site parking spaces. A 2-bedroom apartment, 3 parking spaces on site. At the bottom of the first paragraph, there's a line, while off-street parking requirements can affect planned residential density, particularly for small lots and infill areas, the potential constraint is mitigated by the flexible standards shown above, which I wasn't able to find. But the fact that it calls out, it does put an unfair burden on the kind of things that I think we want, that kind of incremental organic growth that allows our neighborhoods to evolve naturally, small lots and infill areas. So anyway, governmental constraints, I would like to see a little more robustness on the topic of applying the DUA metric, parcel by parcel through zoning, and our on-site parking requirements. Lastly, and I'll conclude, I think it's about 40% market rate housing that we need to build or plan for, and 60% affordable. Now getting the market rate stuff planned for is fairly straightforward. We just fix the zoning and allow for it. But the affordable stuff is a little more tricky. And the way I understand it, we have state density bonus law, which we just default to the state. We don't have our own ordinance. that is a little concerning for us because we lose design control, right? But then that leaves all the responsibility on our inclusionary housing ordinance. And I look forward to how we craft that. And I think we can do a good job and be creative in not only requiring developers, not being flat and too simplistic, but calibrating this ordinance to different neighborhoods, to different housing types, have sliding scales, not just requiring, but incentivizing, kind of laying out alternative tracks so they don't default to density bonus law where we lose design control. Let's come up with our own incentives that we might grant, break on parking, additional height, things like that, that we can incentivize the production of affordable housing. And then I guess just a general question is how much of that is going to be fleshed out in this housing ordinance, or if we're just going to kind of save the development of that for a later date, separate and apart from this process. And those are all my comments tonight. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Toller. Commissioner Russell.
Thank you. First of all, thank you to the staff and to Mr. Chen. There were several questions I wrote down, and as they went through their presentation, they were actually answered. So thank you for that. Just a couple of things that I want to bring up. One of them is the possibility of getting our inclusionary ordinance done a little faster. I think that a lot of it has to be done simultaneously, but I also think that 2 years is a long time. Just to echo, yeah, a red line changes would be really helpful. Then I'd like to see something more fleshed out on the ADUs. We're putting a lot of emphasis on affordability in some of those, and yet I don't see how that's going to be incentivized. So I'd like to see that fleshed out a little bit, and more information about Measure Y and how this is going to all be impacting the housing element and the state law. And let's see. I think that's it for tonight. I will have some more comments that I'll make in an email or something. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Russell. Vice Chair Zick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also will keep it brief. And so I'm not looking for staff to respond. These might sound like some questions. I'm not looking for a response tonight, obviously. One thing I looked for and couldn't find, and I've seen it presented before, and I looked in the community profile, and it was a table that showed the owned versus leased unit counts or percentages for the cities in Orange County. So I'm interested in seeing that. It may exist. I didn't find it. Related to that, I am very interested in seeing something in this plan that indicates that we have an interest in, and I've used the term bias before, but an interest in increasing the ratio of ownership to rental in the city. I don't see that. I think it's important. And I'll come back to why in a moment. The next thing is, when I look through the candidate sites, the one thing that to me stood out rather glaring was the lack of sites on the east side. And I believe I heard the comment from Mr. Chen, possibly, that indicated that there weren't any sites at this point identified along Newport Boulevard. But to the extent that all these candidate sites are essentially some medium probability that they actually come to fruition, it seems to me that there should be candidate sites along Newport Boulevard or on the east side. Somebody might say, well, we're actually counting on ADUs being the way the east side sees its share of the RHNA taken up. But at the very beginning, we talked about this RHNA allocation being something across the city and no one district burdened or unburdened. And so that one caught my attention. Both Commissioner Arith and Commissioner Vivar brought up a point that caught my attention because I'm in violent agreement with them as it relates to a need or an interest in providing opportunities for people to buy housing in Costa Mesa. I think when we use this term affordability, we so quickly associate that with rental. And I'm not saying that isn't important, but if we become a city with nothing but rental, then I think the affordability that we're missing the boat on is the ability for somebody who wants to buy a house to be able to buy a house. They will never be able to buy a house if we don't provide those kind of opportunities. The people whose wealth will increase are the people who own land, own houses, own ADUs, and rent that stuff out. And that's fine. It provides housing. But I think to have a strong community, we want to provide more than somebody just being able to pay rent. And so I think there needs to be an important aspect, and I don't know if it's a separate program or not, but an important aspect of this housing element that deals with how it is we're going to provide more ownership opportunity in the city and how we're going to help facilitate that. Now, Commissioner Toller brought up an important point. When he's talking about financing, and he highlighted that he's not so much talking about financing for purchasing homes, which is obviously important, and that's what I was just speaking towards, but the financing for production of homes. And the reason why that really caught my attention, and I'd like to see if there's a way staff could provide more color to this issue, is that when I had a long conversation a year or two ago with One Metro West about their development, which is all apartments. And I asked why that project wasn't for sale. Why wasn't it a condominium development? And the response was related to the way the financing for that project would work, that the developer would be disadvantaged trying to finance a for ownership project versus a for rent project. And if there's a way that we can deal with that so that developers will not be disadvantaged, then I think home production is something that will be facilitating and encouraging in the city. So that's it for my comments. I really think we need to be pushing more directly on increasing ownership opportunities in the city, not just housing as a generic term, not just affordability as a code word for something else, affordability in the general sense. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Thank you, commissioners, for all your, for listening and for obviously the great deal of study you've been doing and for your thoughtful comments. I just have, I just want to thematically touch on what I'm thinking. I think overall, the housing element as it's currently constituted is a pretty good document. It's actually a very good document. My interest is in focusing on what are going to be, there's a few things in it that I'm concerned how HCD is going to react to them, and I will share them and see how staff can come back maybe and anticipate what we might do in response. But my concern is the two, what I'm calling the two I's, impediments and how we implement. And how we implement is after we have a certified housing element. So I'm going to focus a little bit on and touch on an observation that Vice Chair Zick made, which struck me as well. And that is, I'm really concerned that HCD is going to look at the map where we have all of our housing opportunity sites and say, gee, there's nothing on the east side and there's nothing in Mesa Verde that you've identified. And so, well, it's kind of for obvious reason, aren't any naturally sites that just jump out at you and say, well, that'd be a great place to do, to achieve some affordable housing. It's all R1 neighborhoods. So how do you do that? So one of the things that I would like, and so I'm concerned we're gonna get some comment back. And one of the, I guess, as a housing strategy that I would like to see kind of explained on how we might at least acknowledge it in the housing element. We can't obviously map it out as a policy because we're not there yet. But I'd like to see how we could talk about how we're going to implement our ADU and our JDU ordinance, particularly in alignment with SB 9 and what can happen in an R1 neighborhood. And I'm looking at it from the standpoint of how, if there's a lot of family trusts and investors who own R1 homes throughout Costa Mesa, lots and lots and lots. I think those are the people that are going to take advantage of SB 9 personally. The value of their property has already gone up just by the fact that the law exists. Whether or not it withstands legal challenges, who knows. But if we're going to have that, then I want to make sure that ADUs and junior accessory dwelling units are credited towards our inclusionary housing ordinance with respect to infill projects that may be 10 units, whatever. But even down to these 4-unit things where you might have 4 units, but you might put a JDU in one, and that counts, that's deed restricted, and that counts as an affordable. So I want staff to think about how can we use the ADU and JADU to lever up that 850 ADU number, particularly on the east side and particularly in Mesa Verde, because I think the state's going to go, oh, well, it's nice all those folks don't have to deal with affordable housing in their community, and it's being shoved off. If you look at that table that Mr. Chen put up about where the very low and the low's going, it's going all on the west side. And it's, I have some real concerns about that. It really pops out at me where it's all going. And north, the Costa Mesa, North Costa Mesa specific plan area. So that's one. And I guess what I'm asking for is let me know how we can acknowledge some potential strategy as a housing strategy in the housing element, if we have to. I'm not saying we have to, but that's certainly going to be part of the implementation process. The other thing as an impediment, cost of construction materials, and also part of that is labor. So I'm watching housing elements in probably 12 different cities right now, and God bless them, the Southwest Council of Trades is showing up at every single one of them, talking about how they, want either the housing element or the general plan or some ordinance requiring the use of local labor, and I get that. I'm not necessarily opposed to that, but what I want to understand is, because it's never been done yet that I know of, what is going to be the impact of such a requirement on the cost of construction labor? And does that create an impediment to the creation of affordable housing? I want to understand that. I think it's going to be important for the City Council's ad hoc committee to understand that. While the representative can credibly argue that if outside labor is coming in from wherever to build a project, that you're right, that's cars on the road, and that could be it could be an environmental impact. I doubt it's going to be I doubt it would be a significant impact. First of all, it's transitory. It's associated with construction and going to last forever. But I want to understand, because they're going to be in front of us the whole time, and I want to understand what is going to be the economic impact or the impediment created potentially of that kind of local requirement on the cost of developing affordable housing. So that's another. Just when we come back, because I understand what's going to go on, but in terms of the CEQA process, I get why this is in MND. It's a programmatic, it's a policy document. It's not really quote unquote a project, I guess, but you have to call it a project under CEQA. But what is our CEQA process going to be going forward in crafting the implementation elements of this? So general plan update with respect to circulation, whatever it's going to be. Obviously, we're going to have to come in and do more extensive CEQA analysis around the implementation of this housing element relative to the various other general plan elements, the zone changes. So I just an explanation of how CEQA is going to work post-housing element. I'm particularly interested in hearing from a VMT analysis. That's going to be interesting to me. So opportunities to buy, I get that. So inclusionary housing ordinance, which in my more conservative days, I opposed them. I think they're actually working now pretty well. I think most in the development community recognize that they're useful and that they can live with them as long as you get the density. Sorry for using that term, Mr. Toller. So as long as you can get the density to make the numbers work. So, Costa Mesa needs one. Inclusionary housing works both for sale projects and for apartments. So if you're going to build a 40-unit condominium, single family, it's a 40 single-family detached homes, let's say on a condominium map, you can require a certain percentage of those be for low income. But what I want to remind everybody is that's about as far as we can go, because there's nothing that this city can do, really, and I've talked to a couple of other planning directors about this and some city attorneys, that says once somebody buys a house and it may be restricted for low income, there's nothing that can turn around and rent that to somebody, make it income property. I don't know how a city restricts for sale housing to, it must be owner occupied. So I think there's programs we can do to facilitate first time buyers. In fact, I think we've had it before in the past here in the city is second loans that the city's provided. The president's recently enacted infrastructure program, I think, has a boatload of money in it for housing opportunity, affordable housing. I'm not sure, but I thought I saw it in there somewhere. So I think there's more money to be had. I think what the city can do to encourage ownership, at least first-time buyer, is to set those kind of programs up, or we can assist with financing, as everybody was talking about. Maybe that's something that you could just offer up to us next meeting or by the 13th. Like I said, I don't have a ton of questions about the housing element. I think the document's about as best as we can do right now until we hear from the state. But I do want to make sure that if we have time to flesh out implementation a little bit more, impediments. The big one for me is Measure Y. And I know part of the ad hoc committee the city council put together is to look at that. Pardon my language, but I think at some point the state's going to come and crap all over that thing, because it's really going to put the skids to anything that we want to bring forward, that a development community wants to bring forward, because they don't want to take the risk. And so minimally, it needs to be modified. For instance, the rule that says there's a cumulative effect of projects over an 8-year period they're a half-mile distance from one another is just a stupid provision. And it just puts the brakes on so much stuff that could be done from a affordable housing or any kind of housing development. So we have to figure out a way, and I hope the ad hoc committee really dives into this and works with the original authors of Y to say, look, we understand why you brought Y forward. Things have changed a bit, but the state may tell you ultimately that your Y doesn't matter. So why don't we work together to modify it to at least demonstrate to the state that we're trying to make an effort to overcome this impediment and keep some local control while allowing us to achieve try to achieve our RHNA goals. I think that's it for me for now. So unless there's any other commissioner comments, we will. I'm gonna ask for a motion to continue this item to. Oh, if I'll make the motion, I move that we continue this item, keep the public hearing open and public comment open, continue the item to the meeting of November 22nd, 2021. And is there a second on that?
Second by Arith.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Arith. So a motion by the chair to continue, seconded by Commissioner Arith. Any comments on the motion? Okay, Julie, could you please call roll?
Commissioner Rojas?
Sorry. Okay. Present and yes.
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 Okay.
Okay, Commissioner Toller?
Yes.
Commissioner Russell?
Yes.
Vice Chair Zick?
Aye.
Chair Jericho?
Aye.
Commissioner Vivar?
Aye.
Commissioner Arith?
Aye.
That motion carries 7-0.
Okay, and thank you very much. And commissioners, I would again urge you over the next 2 weeks to really dive into it. And if there's specific questions you have, bring those forward to the next meeting. And if you know them early, try to get them to staff so they're prepared so we don't catch them flat-footed. And with that, we'll go to departmental reports. Give me a chance to get to my agenda here. And we'll start with public services report.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and also honorable members of the Planning Commission. Good evening. I'm Sung Yang, city engineer. So in terms of the public services report, I would like to mention that the city of Costa Mesa received grant funding from Caltrans to conduct a local roadway safety plan, or LRSP. The LRSP is being developed through collaboration with local stakeholders and will identify safety countermeasures and identify roadway and intersection locations where the city can improve roadway safety for pedestrians, bicyclists, and motorists. In addition, cities will be required to have an approved LRSP in place to be eligible for future state safety grant funding starting in 2022. Based on the outcomes of the analysis, the project team is identifying project-specific improvements as well as citywide efforts that can be incorporated into future planning and development efforts. So the city is looking for your input. So the community is invited to attend the virtual community meeting on November 17th, 2021 from 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. to share your input and ideas for traffic safety opportunities in Costa Mesa. So this meeting is through a Zoom teleconference, and more information can be found on the city's website. In addition, I would like to mention that the City Council study session on November 9th, 2021, which is tomorrow, will discuss a citywide parking study and the recommendations for the residential permit parking program. The meeting will start at 5 p.m. On November 9th and will be held in the City Council chambers and also via Zoom teleconference. So more information can be found on the city website as well. So therefore, that ends my public services report, and I defer back to the chair.
Thank you, sir, very much. Development services, Ms. Lee.
Thank you, Chair. A few things tonight. SB 9 has been mentioned a few times during the discussion this evening. Just wanted to let the Commission know that staff intends to agendize an item for the next meeting where we provide a presentation on SB 9 and answer any questions that you may have and talk a little about next steps. And I'd also like to take a moment to introduce our new Administrative Secretary, Anna Partita. You see her with us here this evening. This is her first Planning Commission meeting, and she will be running these meetings and running us moving forward, and we appreciate her being here, and thank you and welcome. That ends my presentation this evening, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. City Attorney report, Mr. Preziosi.
No report, Chair.
Okay. We will then stand in adjournment to our regularly scheduled meeting of November 22nd, 2021. Good night.